Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the National Firearms Centre, part of the British Royal Armouries in Leeds, where we are taking a look at a very interesting hybrid weapon. This was manufactured in the Dominican Republic. It was designed by Hungarian refugee Pál Király, and it is basically a Beretta submachine gun scaled up to .30 carbine, but with Pál Király's style of levered delayed blowback system on the inside. So this is the Model 2 San Cristobal Carbine, named after the region and the arsenal where it was manufactured in the Dominican Republic. This was made under the direction of Rafael Trujillo, who is the dictator of the Dominican Republic, and he wanted to expand the Dominican military and also its manufacturing capabilities in the late 1940s. So in 1948, he, with some Hungarian technical assistants, again, some refugees from the falling Iron Curtain, basically, set up Armoria San Cristobal in the San Cristobal area. And this was actually like a full-service arsenal that manufactured a bunch of different guns, machine guns, mortars, most of these things being copies of other products, but their most notable, their most interesting and recognizable product was this, the San Cristobal Carbine. So Pál Király himself arrived in 1948 and got to work designing this gun. He's an interesting guy in that he was actually born in 1880, so he was really fairly elderly by the time he got to the Dominican Republic. He had previously, before World War II, well, during World War I, he was actually, I believe, a captain, an officer in the Austro-Hungarian military, survived World War I. In the interwar period, he went to work for SIG, where he had a hand in the SIG MKMO submachine guns, which is the first appearance of this levered delayed system. During World War II, he then went back to Hungary, where he worked for FEG and had a hand in the Austrian 39M and 43M submachine guns, which are also the same basic lever delay system, and a lot of the same basic design from that original SIG gun brought over to Hungary, where those guns were mass-produced. And then, of course, after World War II, when the Iron Curtain starts to come down, he escapes to conservative Dominican Republic, where he offers his services again as an arms designer, interestingly offering basically the same gun that he'd been doing all his life. The one design he had that was particularly successful was this one. So let's go ahead and pull this apart, and I'll show you how the lever delay system works and how this gun was put together, because it really is just a hybrid of a couple different systems. Starting with the markings, as usual, we've got the armory markings up here, Armoria EN, San Cristobal RD, República Dominicana, Dominican Republic. Back here, we have the caliber and the serial number. So caliber is .30 carbine, and this is number 6651. Serial number is also stamped in big numbers on the side of the buttstock there. In addition to the Hungarian engineers who are working in the Dominican Republic, there were also a number of expatriate Beretta folks there, and that is really obvious as you look at this gun. There's a ton of Beretta influence to it. First off is just the stock, the sling attachment style, the serial number style, very Beretta, a lot of Beretta influence there. The trigger mechanism here is also a very obvious Beretta influence. You have two triggers. The front one is semi-auto and the rear one is full auto. The safety lever is, again, a Beretta influence. This is basically a Beretta 3842 submachine gun scaled up to .30 carbine and given a levered delay system internally. So the front position here, F, is fire, and the rear position is safe. Now, the rear sight is actually not a Beretta thing. This is much more just based on a typical sporting sight. It is an aperture, and then you have this lifter here to lift the sight itself up for different extended ranges, although it's not actually marked what those ranges are. The magazine is a 30-round double stack type with a magazine release back here. This appears very similar to the Beretta Model 57 magazines, but they are not interchangeable. Note that this one has 3 witness holes for 10, 20, and 30 rounds. Where the Beretta 57 locked open when empty, because it was a closed bolt gun, this has no hold open tab on it, and this does not lock open when it's empty because it fires from the open bolt, so it always locks open. You'll notice that this does enter the gun at a bit of an angle. That's to improve feeding. Just works a little bit better that way. So there's your magazine. It's a nice sturdy magazine, actually, a lot better than the US M1 Carbine magazines. Further evidence of our Beretta influence here is the fact that it ejects out the left side of the gun and has a charging handle on the right side of the gun. Why Beretta did that exactly with the Model 38 is a bit, I'm not entirely sure. I'm sure they had a good reason for it. There are a number of potential reasons, but because they did that, everyone who then later went to copy the system copied that feature as well, including the Hungarians working in the Dominican Republic. So, like I said, locks open. The charging handle is non-reciprocating, so you can slide it back to close that open slot in the receiver. And then lastly, at the very front, we have a nice big square front sight post with a protective hood around it. No setup for a bayonet on these. Disassembly is done by removing the receiver end cap. Again, a very Beretta influence there. It's not threaded on. You rotate it 90 degrees and then it unlocks. You can see the little lugs that are pressed in. However, there is a locking button, which I really just can't get a camera angle in to show you, but you can see this cutout here. That is to allow you to get a tool into the locking button. So I'm going to put this in there, just push that in, and then I can rotate this. There we go. There is a very strong recoil spring in here, so you have to be careful when opening this to let it out slowly. There we go. So there's our end cap, and then we can pull out the bolt assembly, and this is the interesting heart of the gun because it has this lever delayed system. We'll start by taking it apart. There's a couple bits in here. First off, this is lever delayed, so this piece right here is our lever, and it's going to dictate the interaction between the bolt head and the bolt rear. Now this just drops out. There we go. So there's that piece. We then have a piece right here which locks these two together and limits how far they can travel forward and backward. That piece also just drops out. This one's a lot simpler, just an oval with a block on it. Then we can pull these two apart. So this is our bolt face. It's going to pick up cartridges here from the magazine. It's got our extractor. It's got our extractor comes all the way back there. All that sort of good stuff, but it does not have a firing pin. The firing pin is actually located on the rear portion, and it is removable. It just sits on there. In fact, it's held in place when this is inside the main bolt head. And that's the firing pin right there. So pretty simple. Now, the concept of delayed blowback is simply that on a standard blowback firearm, pressure on the bolt face causes the bullet, well, when you fire, you've got a cartridge here, and that pressure is going to cause the bullet to fly forward and the bolt to fly backward. Because the bullet weighs many, many times less than the bullet will go a lot faster than the bolt will. And the concept on a simple blowback submachine gun is to have the bolt weigh enough that it doesn't actually pull the brass out of the chamber until pressure is low enough that the brass can hold it and won't explode. When you go from something like 9mm Parabellum and step it up in power to, say, 30 carbine like this, you need something in addition, because if you want to do that with just simple blowback, you need a very heavy bolt. Heavy enough that the gun gets heavy. Firing it from an open bolt gets very difficult because you have a lot of mass slamming forward when you fire, etc. So there are a number of different mechanisms. These really like falling apart. There are a number of different mechanisms for delaying that, and the one we have here is one of the lesser used ones, the lever delayed. So you'll find this basically on the other guns that Pál Király did for Switzerland and Hungary, and you'll also find a system like this in the French FAMAS assault rifle. Other than that, there are no other large production guns that are lever delayed that I'm aware of. So the way this works is when the gun is coming into battery, when this bolt is cycling forward, it's in this configuration, and you have this little step, this little toe on the bottom of the lever. And this will hit a stop, a solid bar in the receiver. It will stop, and it will rotate down like this as the bolt continues to go forward, but the receiver is holding this in place. So it does this, which forces the rear part of the bolt to compress forward like that, which actually exposes the firing pin and fires around. Remember, this is an open bolt gun, so there is no circumstance in which the bolt will be closed with an unfired cartridge just sitting in the chamber, unless you just have a dud primer. Then, once the cartridge detonates, everything's going to want to go backwards, and as the bolt starts to move backwards, this lever is now going to hit an angled block in the receiver that it can't pass. It has to lift up like this in order to get through the receiver and continue backwards. But because it has this protrusion on the inside that interacts with the rear face of the rear part of the bolt, this lever can't go up until after the rear section of the bolt is accelerated backwards. What this does is just take some time to do. It takes just enough time, this is a minuscule delay, but it's just enough time for the bullet to get out of the end of the barrel and for pressure in the barrel to drop, as I described before, to the point where when the brass starts to get pulled out of the chamber, it won't explode from pressure. So the rear half of the bolt gets pushed back just that far, and then the whole thing can continue backwards and repeat the process. The firing sear is right back here. So the trigger system is really quite simple. It's just a basic submachine gun type, well, a Beretta 3442 type fire control group. Sear holds onto this notch when you drop it, then the whole thing comes forward and goes through this firing and delaying and opening process. And this guy really likes to fall out. So that's the operation of the gun. There's really not a whole lot else on the receiver to show you. The receiver just ends here with a barrel. Because it's delayed blowback, there's no recoil system and there's no gas system. So out here we just have a simple barrel under the handguard until we get out all the way to the muzzle. And the receiver tube itself is just a plain hollow tube with the exception of one little surface inside there to hold on to and basically actuate this lever. All right, now production numbers are up for debate here. If you look through the various pieces of literature, you'll find a lot of people claiming that like 200 or 250,000 of these were manufactured. I find that a little bit difficult to strictly believe. When you see numbers from some slightly more authoritative sources talking about actual like monthly production tallies, they're usually 500 or less per month, which over the 16-year production span from 1950 to 1966, by the way, Király died in 1965, so by the end, this may have been in production only really because of his direct influence. At any rate, if you're making like 500 a month, you can't make $250,000 in 16 years. So the most authoritative number I found was from Jean Yuan, who says 84,000 between 1950 and 1957, and an undetermined number between 57 and 66. I would go ahead and be willing to, my suspicion is probably a little more than 100,000 of these total. A bunch of them were kept by the Dominican military for its own use, the Dominican Republic's army, 19,000 according to Yuan. And then the rest were sold for export. They were sold fairly widely around Central and South America. Colombia bought them. Cuba was apparently one of the biggest purchasers. So in terms of like how they could have made 6 figures of these, but they're so rare to find today, well, if the majority of them went to Cuba, that's kind of a black hole. Those aren't going to show up very much on the international trade once they get to Cuba. So that would kind of account for that discrepancy. You do definitely see pictures of these in pictures of Castro and the Cuban Revolution. So Cuba was a big purchaser, and then smaller purchases by a bunch of other South American countries. Because they're a very simple gun, the .30 carbine cartridge was around because of US military aid with surplus M1 carbines that were floating around most of the world. And tactically, it's a very interesting idea. An open bolt, .30 caliber carbine, sort of intermediate between a submachine gun and a rifle. Now, if it were me, I think I would have much preferred the Beretta 57, which is basically the same time period and very similar gun overall, but it doesn't have the lever delay system. and it has a locked breech, and it fires from a closed bolt. And to me, this gun would make a lot more sense with a closed bolt. The open bolt is kind of like a big submachine gun making it closed bolt, like the Sturmgewehrs, where we see a very similar decision tree going, where the MKB-42s were all open bolt guns, and it was realized that that was really not the best way to go, both because it left the bolt open to let dirt into the gun, and also because it was hard to fire accurate single shots when you had the bolt slamming closed with every trigger pull, at the beginning of every trigger pull. And that's why the Germans went from open to closed bolt on the MP-43. Well, the Beretta 57, if we want to consider that the analog to the MP-43, is a much more effective gun in semi-auto because it is a closed bolt system. Anyway, I'm kind of wandering afield here. These guns do show up, but they're really quite rare, so hopefully you guys enjoyed taking a look at one. I'm very happy to have gotten the chance, especially comparing this. We do also have a video up on the Beretta 57, so if you're curious about guns of this style, take a look at that one as well. It's linked in the description, or it's linked at the end of the video. I do also need to give a big thanks to the Royal Armories in the UK, in Leeds specifically, for giving me access to their collection to grab guns like this one and take them apart and show to you guys. Their collection is not open to the general public, but it is available by appointment to firearms researchers. So if there's something in particular that you're interested in, get in touch with them. Their website is in the description below, and arrange a visit to the Armories. Thanks for watching.